The questions which really interest a philosopher about war are these. What is war? It's really quite interesting that you need a good definition of what war is, because it makes a great difference whether a conflict is, properly speaking, a war or not. I mean, imagine this. One man might kill another and get a medal for it. One man might kill another and be indicted for murder. In the first instance, it happens in the context of a declared war. In the second, not. So war, a state of war, creates a new and a different moral and legal universe, and therefore the definition matters. That's one question. What is war? Second question is, what causes war? Is there a generic cause of war? Is it in human nature or in human arrangements? If it's in human nature, that's a very pessimistic fact, because it means that we are doomed to war and perhaps doomed by war. But if it's in our human relationships, in our institutions, in international relations, then there is something we can do about it, and that's optimistic. Then again, there is the question, whatever justifies war? Are there any good wars? Are there any ways that we can morally say it was right to go to war? And how should we behave in the course of war? What are the moral constraints there? And what about after war? How are we to make sure that the situation following a war won't create another war? If you ask yourself, is war in our genes? Is it in our human nature? Well, ask yourself the following question. Why is it that people are so terribly traumatized by war? Why is it that soldiers who go to war, who see death, who see dismemberment, who see the horrible insults to the human body and to towns and cities and countryside that a war will produce, and they become very traumatized about it and live with the mental scars afterwards? Doesn't this tell us that this is not really natural to human beings, and that maybe it's in our social organization instead? And wouldn't that latter point be reinforced by the thought that war is a relatively recent phenomenon in human history, a phenomenon that emerges once human societies begin to get organized? When you compare the terrible atrocities and massacres and awful things that people did way back in the past in ancient history, and you look and see that almost exactly the same things are happening today in some parts of the world, it looks as though we've made no progress whatever. In fact, there's a wonderful remark by Theodor Adorno, beautifully captured, by the way, in the front cover of the book, where he says, "We have grown cleverer, we humans, but not wiser over time." And this is illustrated by the fact that we've cleverly developed the spear into the guided missile, but we're no wiser because we're still fighting wars. So this really dramatizes this question. Have we made any kind of progress? And I think the answer is a qualified yes in some ways, and despite appearances. Because as has been pointed out by Steven Pinker and others, for example, the percentages of populations who die violent deaths in conflict and in war had been decreasing dramatically over the course of history, and even more dramatically since the 18th century Enlightenment. That, of course, is a very, very good sign. But of course the world population has increased dramatically also, which means that the absolute numbers of people dying and injured in war and affected by war has increased dramatically also. But the very fact that we now have international customary law, humanitarian law about behavior in war, and that the United Nations, whatever else its failings might be, has really come up with some very, very clear ideas about what would justify war, inch by inch, or millimeter by millimeter, perhaps to be even more modest, we are sort of edging our way towards a situation where we're really trying to make effective constraints operate before wars happen and during the course of wars. So despite appearances, maybe we are bit by bit making a bit of progress. Among the things that I would like readers to get from the book is the thought that we can do something about war. It isn't an inevitability, that if we were to club together and confront the circumstances that produce war, we may very well be able to lessen the occurrence of war, maybe even eventually to obviate it from human experience.